I would like to welcome you all to this meeting. I have to say, I'm personally very excited about it. That's partly because I'm a former Bradfordian myself, and so to have a meeting with Bradford in the title is always a treat for us. The meeting tonight is on Self-Defence is No Offence, from the Bradford 12 to the Rotherham 12. It's a very important meeting, and I think it's great that people have come here to hear the speakers. My name is Esme Chinara, and I'm going to be chairing the meeting tonight. I'll introduce the speakers one or two at a time as we go along. I should just explain that if people want to ask questions or contribute, which I hope many people will contribute to the discussion and will ask questions, we are going to be having speaker slips because there's quite a lot of you for me to see in the room, and also because sometimes people want to ask questions, or you might want a question read out for one of the panel that you could write down on one of the speaker slips. So at some point soon you will see people walking around waving, oh there you go, there's some over there, waving little slips. And if you want to just write your name and any points that you want to make on that, it just helps to make sure that there's a balance of different people contributing and that we get any questions raised in particular from the floor. I am going to call the first speakers are Michael Mansfield and Yvette Greenway. I believe that Michael is going to further introduce Yvette, but Yvette Greenway is one of the co-founders of SOS, Silence of Suicide, and they'll explain more about what that is. Michael Mansfield, if any of you need an introduction, is obviously a well-known barrister who was involved in both the Bradford 12 defence campaign and the Rotherham 12 defence campaign, and pretty much campaigning against any injustice that's happened over the last few decades. So we're delighted that Michael could be with us tonight, and I'll pass over to them.
Yes, thanks very much. A slight deviation, but I think you'll see why there's a relevance. I just asked if we could presume upon your patience tonight to explain something that Yvette and I have started 2 years ago. My daughter committed suicide, and after that we realised what need there was amongst the communities about the issue of mental welfare. Now, I'm bringing it up to date because we're both involved, both from a legal point of view and also from that point of view, at Grenfell Towers at the moment, and we've been down there several times. But I would just like, as I say, to try your patience a little bit for Yvette, just to explain what we've been doing, and then I'll bring it back into the arena of both the Bradford 12 and bring it up to date with the Rotherham 12 as well. But so a few minutes for Yvette. Thank you.
I've got to stand up. I just can't sit down while I'm addressing all of these people. Good evening, everyone. It's great to be here, and I'd just like to take a few minutes of your time just to tell you about the work Michael and I are doing with SOS Silence of Suicide. As he said, we found it following the suicide of one of his daughters, Anna. And we go around the country offering free group meetings in a safe space for people that have been affected by suicide in whatever way, whether they've been bereaved by it or they've thought of taking their own lives themselves. So we go around the country, we go into organisations, we work in government departments, and of course, as Michael says, we're working with the Grenfell communities now. We've been asked to work closely with them, and also the emergency support services, because of course people think of the immediate trauma that people are going through, but the emergency service personnel, of course, have been through some horrific traumas themselves too. So it seems like a bit of a fighting place here. I mean, I was looking at these posters earlier on when I came, and I thought there's some really interesting words, Motivational, yeah? Encouraging you to take action. So we've got, well, let's start from this way first. So we've got, let's have a look. Okay, so we've got smash. Yeah, nice, powerful. Okay. Dump. And especially the bit underneath, but we'll forget about that. Okay, so kick out, yeah? Smash again. Fight. That's really important. Fight, remember that word. Defy. Join. And it goes on. So they're all encouraging you to take action. Now, for any of you that believe in something and have a passion about something, what do you do to achieve something? What do? You act. Exactly. It's the same with mental health, okay? Whether it be suicide or mental health problems in general, okay? There are sort of relationships between the two. So all we're saying is that if you get a minute, take a look at our website, SOS Silence of Suicide, okay? You'll see what we do, the work that we're doing. If anybody needs to get in touch, then you're quite welcome to do that. Because as more and more services are cut by government and councils, then it's down to you to actually self-help. It shouldn't be like that, but unfortunately it's becoming like that. And there are ways that you can do that. And just as a matter of interest, I'd like to ask, I'm going at a bit of a tangent here, can you put your hands up if you drink tea? Okay. Coffee drinkers? Okay. Hands up if anybody here has been affected by suicide. Okay. Okay. Yeah. Hands up if people have had mental well-being issues. Not necessarily that you've thought about suicide, but mental well-being issues. So what do you have to do to get the services you want? Fight. Okay? Defy what people are saying you can and you can't have in terms of services. You've got to get out there, you've got to speak out, and you've got to fight for what you need and for what other people need. That's really important. Anyway, I'm going to hand you over to Michael. He's got lots to say, but thank you very much for listening. Thanks.
Thank you. Yes, well, really, I haven't got anything to add. That's it. Yeah. No, there is... and Yvette is quite right, that the, sort of the root of all of this was the fact that people are reticent, not about drinking tea or coffee, but about disclosing pressures on their lives, and particularly using the word suicide. And it's communities of the kind that we are going to... Well, it's everybody, in fact, but Grenfell Tower, in a sense, is the pinnacle of the pressures that we're all facing, because of the way they've been treated in the past, and other communities similar to theirs have been treated in the past. It isn't just about a fire, and that's what we're trying to persuade a somewhat reserved judge to come into the not only the 20th century, but the 21st century, and understand and connect, which is going to be a big task. There was a meeting last night when he apparently didn't quite make it. So you will see the task there, but what struck me strongly by going down there, I was asked to go with Yvette to speak to them, because obviously I've represented people in the Notting Hill community over many years now. I've been at it, this is my 50th year, so I've been around a long time. When I got there, I thought back, well, not quite to Bradford, but I thought about Bradford, I thought about Rotherham, I thought about most of the cases, community cases I've been involved in over the 50 years. And some of them, and I don't want it to be a roll call, but it just gives you a clue as to where I'm going here. For example, well, certainly from Notting Hill, I don't know how many people here will remember the Mangrove case, but that was a community case in Notting Hill. But also the Lawrence case, probably everybody in the room knows about. Now, there are many, many more. But what struck the theme in all of these cases is the way in which the people most vulnerable, and often the victims and their survivors and the families and their friends, have been marginalized over the years and have been ignored over the years. Their voices have not been listened to, right through to recently the child abuse inquiry, where people, and I'm representing a big group, that walked out in the end because they were ignored. And we've got it again. They've been ignored in the Grenfell Towers. They were putting out warnings about what was going to happen. Nobody listened. Despite all of that, they're now being ignored yet again when it comes to who's going to be the chair, what are the terms of reference. Well, they finally got round to the fact, well, maybe we do need to listen a bit harder. But what is making them listen? This is the part that I find most interesting. What's making them listen is you. Is the ordinary people saying, 20 years ago, this would not have happened. If a High Court judge had gone to a community 20, 30 years ago and said, oh, it's Michael Mansfield here, and do be quiet just while I tell you what and people would. There was a sense of deference, and people would well, respect isn't quite the word, but they would defer to somebody. And that's not happening anymore. Why is it not happening? Because people have woken up to the fact, it's not just Brexit and all that debate, which we're probably a bit bored with by now, but it's an important debate nevertheless. People have woken up to the fact you've got to have a voice and you've got to make it heard. Now, that's one thing that's a very good thing that's come out of the last 20, 30 years, and that's come out of the fact that there are campaigns. And the importance of campaigns is obviously raising awareness. And in a sense, you don't need to be told it, because I think everybody in the room is involved in a campaign. But campaigning is not enough. You can have a campaign which, as it were, provides solidarity, a word that you're not supposed to use anymore. It's become a dirty word, but it's coming back in again because people realize that the way forward is to stand as a collective. And that's what we're trying to do at Grenfell Towers, is to do what we tried to do at Bradford, and Tariq here may well have much more to say about that. What we tried to do at Rotherham as well is to provide people not only with a campaign of support, but also a way of organizing. Because when you've been traumatized, well, Grenfell's the extreme. When you've been traumatized as a community, it's quite difficult to turn around and build an organization. But you need one. And the reason you need one, and I'm going to work backwards in a sense, in Rotherham, the Rotherham 12 case wouldn't have become an apocryphal case unless there'd been a campaign of support from people like yourselves, number one. Number two, there were individuals, and sometimes it does take an individual to do it, who are prepared to go into the communities at the point in time at which they're most vulnerable. For example, 12 people being accused, wrongly, being accused of serious criminal offences when all they were doing was protecting their community against the usual thugs and racists. And what that took was, and perhaps he would be embarrassed if I say, but one of the key individuals, he's here tonight. And I said to him before I started, I said, I wouldn't be here talking about this, neither would the Rotherham 12, if it hadn't been for you. And what he did as a lawyer, and it requires the same in all these cases, to work together with the community, to make them see, make the community see, that they have got a defence, that self-defence is no offence. Now, it seems obvious to all of you here. You probably think, yeah, well, what's so new in that? Well, you'd be surprised, because what began to happen in the Rotherham 12, and I'm not going to name names, is that there were pleas of guilty. And you go, what? And this is because, at the very beginning, people were, I don't know, ill-informed, misinformed, not courageous, didn't have the right advice. But once this particular solicitor got working on this, it came together. They suddenly realized that what they did was actually incredibly courageous. And when it came to my position of presenting their case and actually doing it to the jury at the end of the day, a jury that took, a few minutes to acquit. A whole lot of them. Because we were able to say, touch their hearts, that all that was happening here were people defending a community that had been under pressure in Rotherham, that had been ignored by the police in Rotherham, who were as usual treated as the targets in Rotherham. Yet the police, as usual, had information. They had intelligence. But I did a sort of speech based on Fawlty Towers, and I sort of tried to, you've got to make people laugh a bit, So I said, the officer in charge of this case is a bit like, the Spanish waiter? Yeah. I know nothing. His position was, I know nothing. And say, well, you knew that the racists were going to this pub. No, we didn't. Oh, well, what about this? No, I didn't. Did you know that pub had a reputation, which is where it happened? No, we didn't. In fact, our main officer drove right past it, and we didn't even notice the people standing outside. I mean, that's the level of it. And the jury did the same. They almost laughed it out of court. This case, the 12, should never have been prosecuted in the first place. That's how bad it was. So, and this is a case that's recent. And you think back to the Bradford 12. I thought, I've been here before. do we have to keep relearning the lessons? You don't have to, but a lot of other people certainly do have to keep relearning the lessons. Partly because they don't want to learn them. It's not because they're stupid. They don't want to learn them because they have a different mental attitude, and that's the problem we're trying to get over. Now, the Bradford 12, again, there were key lawyers involved. I'm not speaking about myself. There were key lawyers on the ground who managed, as it were, to coalesce, to bring people together in a collective. So they stood together in the dock. Tariq, I didn't represent Tariq, but I represented somebody else called Tariq. And I've never forgotten the feeling of that case as we stood together. That was one of my earliest cases. And so I wasn't, I'm not a street fighter. I wasn't brought up in a situation in which they were. And I wasn't living in a street in which there was that kind of oppression. I was lucky. So I had to learn. And I did learn. And the biggest teacher I had was somebody who lived in Notting Hill. And he died last year. And that's dark as hell. So, and at the very beginning of my career, he came to my house and he said, sit down. You know what he's like. I didn't know him. He turned up on a Sunday. I didn't invite him. And how he found my address, I don't know. I expect all of you know what he's like. And he came in and said, sit down, Is there anybody around? I said, well, I've got children somewhere. And he said, right, just listen. And so I did listen. For 2 hours, he stayed. And I managed to offer him, a crumpet or something. But basically, he said, look, you're not part of us, but you're going to be by the end of this case. There was another case. By the end of this case, you're going to be part of us, and you've got to understand where we're coming from and why you're important to us. So there was a combination there. But in the Bradford 12, it happened again. And I can't remember whether he came up or not. But anyway, he was certainly interested in the case, and he was interested in fighting it in a way which was political, with a small p, which was unheard of in those days. You were out of court. Mr. Mansfield, I don't want a political speech from you again. Which is interesting because it's only a day or so ago I was in the Court of Appeal in front of the Lord Chief Justice explaining why Tony Blair should be prosecuted. And so, I think I can go now. That's it. Anyway, so... But I could not have explained a case that I did, which was highly politicized. Of course, it is politicized, in the small p again. And 20 years ago in the Court of Appeal, I wouldn't have been able to do that. So there is a change, there is a sea change, which is extremely important because it's been brought about by people such as yourselves, and the pressure of opinion finally is turning tides all over the place. And I don't want to go into the last election and momentum and all the rest of it. You're very familiar, so I don't want to go into very familiar ground. But a bit you're probably not familiar with, and am I overrunning? Sorry, God, I am. A couple of minutes, right, okay. I just wanted to tell, and Matthew, the solicitor I've been talking about, in Rotherham said you must tell the stories of Bradford. Now, Tariq may or may not remember these. This is when the lawyers got arrested. You see, he didn't even know that we did. Well, not quite. It was nearly that.
Though sometimes we thought some of them ought to be.
Yeah. I really am leaving. So it was nearly that. It was nearly that. Tariq will remember that really at the centre of that case, I'm not going to be technical, don't worry. The central issue was, were they, never mind the self-defence is no offence business, were they in possession of an explosive device? That was partly it, which was a Molotov cocktail. Now, if you don't know what a Molotov cocktail is, I can explain to you what they are, how to make them, but I'm not encouraging you to use them. Okay? So we had an expert called Keith Borer. I don't know where he is now, but in any event, he was passionate about this. And he said, they're not explosive devices. Come with me, he says, over the road, opposite the court. There's a courtyard.
Yeah, I do remember.
Oh, I think he was there. But anyway, Keith Borer, the expert, had a crate of milk bottles. And he said, I'm going to show you that these are not explosive devices. So he gets, if you didn't know, you just take the top off of the milk bottle, you fill it half with an inflammable liquid. Obviously, petrol's the most obvious one. You douse a rag in petrol, stick it in the top. You've got to allow a certain amount of oxygen so it burns. You set light to the rag, and then you throw it. And when it lands, not if it doesn't land and it doesn't break, nothing happens. But if it lands and breaks, obviously it goes whoosh. So he said, "We'll try on this wall of this courtyard." So there's a few lawyers there. He's smiling like that. So we start throwing these at the wall, and they go whoosh, and we get quite excited. So we're throwing past them. And then a window, and then we hadn't noticed there's a window up the wall, and it opens, and a man leans out. I can't do the Yorkshire accent Tariq can probably do. And he said, "What are you doing?" And so
He can't do the Yorkshire.
No, I can't do anything. I've got to get a day job somewhere. And so we explained what we were doing, and he said, "Do you know what this is?" And of course we didn't know what it was. It was only the local headquarters of the Conservative Party. So they called the police. And of course they didn't believe a word we said, and there was a sort of tension between the police and ourselves. Anyway, the next day comes the best bit. Now I'm sure you were here for this, and that is I was with obviously other lawyers, and there's a barrister sitting just where you are now, and he came into court. Edmund Alexander, you may remember his name. Unfortunately, he died about 4 years ago, but he was a real character, and he was in this case, was on the front line. And he came in carrying one of those Dickensian medical bags, with leather handles, and it was huge. And I said, "What you got in there then?" He said, "You'll see. I need your help. Can you keep it open?" So I keep it open. I'm looking in there, and there are milk bottles in there. And so when the expert comes to give evidence, and he gets up to cross-examine, he says, "Well, Mr. Borer, I want this jury and the judge to understand what a Molotov cocktail is." So he says, "Do you start with a milk bottle?" So he brings one up, and he puts it on the bench, and the Keith Borer says, "Yes, you start with a milk bottle." "Then do you get petrol?" So he brings up petrol in the court, and he pours it into the bottle. And then he says to the expert, he says, "What next?" And he said, "Well, you need a rag with doused in petrol." So he said, "All right, I've got a rag here." Sticks it in the top, and he said, "Now what?" He said, "Well, you light it, and then you'll see that you've got your Molotov cocktail." He gets the matches out, and the judge ducks. Says, clear the court out!" And so, well, he gets a certain dressing down. Very unfortunate, because in fact, the jury. So I won't tell you what she's really written. No. Okay, so the jury got the point. Very quickly, another quick acquittal, the whole lot. So keep up the good work. Thanks.
So there you go. It's a first for me, hearing instructions on how to Molotov cocktail a Conservative headquarters, coming from a barrister. I would like to introduce our next speaker. I'm very pleased to say our next speaker is Tariq Mehmood, who is one of the Bradford 12. I'm hoping Tariq will explain more about who the Bradford 12 were. Tariq, as well as being one of the Bradford 12, is the author of many different books. I highly recommend them. I think he's a brilliant author. And he currently has a new book out, The Song of Golzarina, which he will be launching at Marxism tomorrow afternoon. You'll find all the details in your timetable. So I'll hand over to Tariq.
I'll use it. Thank you very much. And I think now you know why some of us felt the way we did at the time, because we didn't quite know what was coming next from our great legal team. But the most important aspect, really, I want to talk about 5 different things, and they are really where we are, war, some political questions we were confronted with and whether they have any relevance today, and what the nature of self-defense is. So these are 5 points I'd like to sort of touch upon. But in a way, to go back, to pick up from where Mike is talking about, really none of us, I defended myself at the trial, but actually none of us know what to do until we have to do it. But what we'd certainly learned was that you can't do anything without a whole set of principled people who are organizing. And actually, because I'm not a lawyer, we knew that the lawyers were performing as well. And because we had large, that's not meant as an insult, but we certainly had a couple of lawyers amongst our team who I would say were very good performers. I'm not sure they were much good at much else. But the important thing there was that there was a campaign outside, there was a unity of the defendants inside, and there was a unity of the legal team. Without those three components being united, I think it's pretty certain I would have gone down, and so would many others, and would have been looking at many years in jail. But I'll touch upon those in a minute, because I don't want to talk too much about myself and the past, and you can ask questions later on. But I will refer back to some of the points in the Bradford 12, but really start with where we are today and where we were then in the broad political spectrum. There was a war going on. The British warplanes, we heard them taking off when we were in court, Michael, when they were I think the bombers were going to bomb the Malvinas Islands. Right, yeah. Afghanistan was occupied. Whilst we were trying to recruit people to fight against racism, the intelligence services of Britain and many others involved were recruiting and grooming young men to go fight in the jihad in Afghanistan. I didn't read this in books. I argued against them. There is no liberation for you to be found in Afghanistan. We have to fight where we live. And my friends are here, plentiful from Bradford as well. But let's have a look at the situation today. I don't know if the young woman is in this room or not, but I got a message from somebody on Facebook that my cousins have just had acid thrown in their faces, and one's really badly damaged. And for a moment I was really jolted. I didn't know, is somebody playing games with me or not? And then a few days, of course, it was no joke. It was very real. Whoever she is, I don't know, but we all know what happened to those. And 3-4 days ago, I was in Bradford, and the president of the TUC, who's Mohammed Taj, who's about to retire, he was in the audience at my book launch there. And when we finished there, he says, just in the space of the meeting that we've been in, I've received messages from all over the country of people's doors being knocked and acid being thrown in their faces. Now, to what scale it is, we don't know. I'm not sure about some of the figures we saw recently of 399. I don't know. Neither is that actually that significant at this moment in time. But there seems to me that there is something missing within the process that we certainly had. And the missing is a series of set, organized, defensive movements and social organizations. The Bradford 12 did not exist in an isolation of an anti-racist struggle. We were supporting the Irish hunger strikers at the time. We were supporting anti-imperialist struggles. We were supporting workers. We were supporting all forms of organizations, and we were called the United Black Youth League. We were young at that time. The black did not mean the color of skin, it was a political color. And white did not mean a political color. Whiteness was our enemy, not white people. But I want to come back to this point in a few minutes, because I think it's quite important. But at the time of the heightened rise of racist violence at the time, those of you who don't have a lot of zeros after your age, there used to come gangs of Paki bashers after the pubs closed, and they would attack us on the streets. They would attack us with knives. They would attack us at times. We were died, just like today. We were killed on the streets here in East London, in Bradford, in other places, in Manchester. This was not a small phenomenon. This was a period when British capitalism was going down. The mills for which we came and the factories for which we came, they were going down. There was a recession. So this process that was being born was coming out of an intense recession that had to have some sort of outlet. And we did not ask for people to defend us, i.e. we did not ask white people to come and give us charity, because actually my problem may have been to start with on the color of my skin. It certainly, we had learned, was not skin deep. It went deep into history, deep into the economic, political and social structures of the time. So in a similar sort of way, I see a difference today. The difference is the violence then was primarily, but not exclusively, directed at men and young boys. Whereas it seems to me it's so prevalent against women that, even in schools, my son told me a few days ago, that actually kids are pulling the hijabs off girls in school. Now, what do we do here? The women don't need to be protected as women. Same situation was for us, not that different. Women needed then to organize, they do need today to organize, and those of us who can have to give acts of solidarity. There is no macho solution to self-defense. That's one of the things we learned. Some of our most prolific fighters on demonstrations, often the men ran. Some of the ones, as you know them, Amrit, they never left the lines, and when we got into physical acts of resistance with our women comrades, they never left a line. But the most important aspect of self-defense was a number of things. Firstly, we had the right to live. Secondly, that life must, and that existence must be one of dignity. You take those two components as the absolute beginning, and the third thing was we knew nobody was going to give it to us. We had to take it back. And all rights and all denials of rights are interconnected through 1,001 different webs. And we had to fight on multiple platforms and not just one. So here then we live in a period of intense austerity. The violence of today is not being born when capitalism is booming. It's being born because it's in recession. It happened before. It's happening now. And in that sense, it has to be resisted. I'll move quickly through before I get told off. So some of the political questions that confronted us, and these are, I suggest, very important. What's the role of white people? And there are people present in this room with whom I had many fights, and I thank you for inviting me to come. One of the central arguments that black people put at that time, we didn't agree with some slogans like black and white, unite and fight. Look, we're in a complex thing, complex political movement. We have to question some of the things we've done. The reason we didn't agree then, Hala, was because we said black people were not the ones responsible for bringing the division. We are not equals. We have a right to unite, for sure, but we have to unite on some terms. Now we have confronted with another problem. At that time, we argued the primary duty of our white comrades was to go and organize in white working class communities. Not in our communities. That doesn't mean don't come with us and give solidarity. I don't know. Now when I look back at history, I see that the lads of football can have 12,000 people marching through London. In those days, you couldn't have more than 7 to 10 fascists with 12,000 of us coming out. Something fundamentally has gone wrong. The left has been decimated, not just here, but right across the globe. So in a sense, we have to rebuild all our processes and re-examine where did we go wrong. And we did go wrong in some places. Now to come on to partly on the nature of self-defense, and I'll sum it up in a minute. In a thing. So when, firstly, in our time, the police were not interested in defending us. Today, even if the police are interested in defending anyone, they are incapable of defending this vast wave of racist violence that is coming the length and breadth of this country. And this wave has a logic. Racism will not tear this country apart. It has held it together. The lack of an anti-racist movement will tear this country apart because there's nowhere else for it to go. And actually, it's not us who need to defend. So where do we go? Firstly, it's undeniable that there is a concerted, violent attack upon Muslim places of worship, Muslims on the street, and old racism, whilst the new one has come about, hasn't gone away. I'll lighten the tone a little bit and share some anecdotes with you. That my son, in 1976, in Bradford, in Manningham Park, a little white boy came up to me and he said, "Hey mate, you speak Paki, do you?" I says, "What?" He goes, "Do you speak Paki?" I says, "Piss off, you twat." And 2016, my son comes home and he says, "Dad." I said, "What?" He goes, "I've just been in the park in Manchester." I said, "And?" He goes, "This white boy came up to me and says, 'Do you speak Muslim?' And I says, what happened then? I said, get lost. And he says, no, go on, speak a bit. And my son went, boom, boom. In a way, it's quite a logical response from my son, because he understood the question of the stereotypes that work. The old racism has not gone away. The new racism has arrived. Just as then, the racist cannot distinguish on the basis of the pigmentation of color, whether you wear a turban, whether you have a beard, whether you have a hijab. And one day they won't know what to distinguish anyway, because it's a movement. And I'll end with one or two other processes, and that is that actually very often we are ourselves become quite internalized, and we internalize some of the subjugation against us. I have spent my life trying to get integrated. I can speak Eba, come love you, all right. I mean, I can spit Bradfordian out left, right and centre. Apart from sheep and a few others, nobody can understand it anymore. And I'm still in the same position. Nothing much has gone on. So actually we develop a culture of resistance in many different ways. And I'll end how some of us are dealing with it. And you know this latest debate about Muslims are integrating. Well, these two friends come from Pakistan to England. And they've heard nowadays, before you can get entry, you've got to agree to integrate, become British, English, boom. They both agree. One goes south, other goes north. A year later, they meet again. And the one who's gone south, long hair, he says, mate, I'm totally, British like. I've grown my hair, I eat bacon, I love dogs. I get drunk and I vomit on the streets. I love the Queen. And England won the World Cup in '66. And how British are you? And the other friend turns around and says, get stuffed to your packy. In a way, so what happens is that we have ended up in this situation that the absurd is now true. But my last words on this point is, it doesn't matter how absurd the situation has. The fundamentals have not changed. We can change our future if we get hold of our history and at least fight for our present. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tariq. Unfortunately, Abrar Javid from the Rotherham 12 hasn't been able to join us in person tonight, but he has sent a message for me to read out, which says, Salam. First of all, sincerest apologies from the Rotherham 12, who could not attend tonight and be with our comrades. From Cardiff to Newcastle, we have met the most resilient and dedicated comrades who strive to bring justice and equality to those who have become pawns of the elite and powerful. Our struggle is not unique, but we have shown by standing up against the machine what can be achieved. This was only possible with our comrades from Stand Up to Racism, Sheffield and Manchester, Unite Against Fascism, and the trade unions who have staunchly supported us. We need to stand united in the face of austerity, Islamophobia, and any other propaganda that the far right throw at us. Only by remaining united, we will smash them. Solidarity from the Rotherham 12. And so our final contribution from the panel tonight will be from Brian Richardson, who is a socialist lawyer and the editor of Unite Against Fascism's magazine Unity.
Thanks very much, Esme. I'll try to be brief so that we can have as much time for audience participation as possible. But I wanted to begin really where both Michael and Tariq left off, because I think we should regard this meeting not simply as a nostalgic look back on struggles from times past, but as a meeting that is absolutely relevant to the struggles that we face today and will face in the future. The examples of Grenfell, the examples that Tariq spoke about. I lived in Stratford in East London for 16 years until the end of 2015. I went back there just 2 days ago, and the reason I was there was because I was joining a vigil that was organised by Stand Up to Racism against the horrific acid attack that a young a young couple experience that has left them with life-changing injuries, a horrific indication of some of the things that are happening in our society today that Tariq talked about. I am, as Esme said, a lawyer. I'm particularly proud of the fact that I practice in Michael Mansfield's chambers because Michael, as you've heard, is somebody who's not simply a lawyer who goes the extra mile representing his clients and the communities that he's fought for decades, but because, precisely because he understands the importance not simply of relying upon clever lawyers to deliver justice, but of communities organising and campaigning and struggling and themselves informing the legal strategies that are taken up. And it's that really that I want to focus on because long before I became a lawyer, I have been and remain a community activist, if you like, a political activist, and I became that inspired by examples like the Mangrove Nine, the Lawrence family, the Bradford 12, the struggles of the Anti-Nazi League in the 70s, 90s, and so on. And it's that I want to focus on, because if you think about it, with a few notable exceptions, Darcus Howe and I think Frank Critchlow being examples of larger-than-life characters, if you think about the people who have been involved in these struggles, they really are just ordinary people going on about their lives. People talk about Doreen and Neville Lawrence as being incredibly dignified, extraordinary people. They are extraordinary people, but they were just an ordinary family going about their life who became extraordinary because they had to fight for some form of justice. Of course, they won't ever get real justice. Stephen Lawrence will never have his life back. He will never have the future that was ripped from him when he was murdered in 1993. But nevertheless, that ordinary family became extraordinary and did something extraordinary for our society and our communities because they stood up and because they fought and because they simply wouldn't give in. And I think it is, into that group of people that we have to place as well the most recent example of the Rotherham 12. I'm just going to say a little bit about the Rotherham 12 and perhaps others can add to it. If you think about it, this was a community, the Muslim community in Rotherham, who were vilified for years. Vilified as a result, of course, of the child sexual abuse scandal, a scandal that the authorities ignored for years and years and years. And then finally, when a group of mainly Muslim Pakistani men were convicted of crimes in relation to that, then the entire Muslim community was targeted and had to face the horrific example of fascist Britain First marching, I believe it was 14 times, I can be corrected if I'm wrong, 14 times, deliberately trying to stir up race, hatred and violence. And that culminated in the murder of 81-year-old Mushin Ahmed. And in the face of that, the Muslim community were expected to do absolutely nothing, to stay at home, be cowed, be apologetic for the behaviour of their community. But finally, they said no. They stood up, they marched, they opposed the fascists, and disgracefully, as a result of that, they were charged with, 12 of them were arrested and charged with these offences of violent disorder. Very serious offences, very serious prison sentences that you could get as a result of it. But again, ordinary men, supporting their community, defending their community, said no. And they took the example of the Bradford 12 and said, self-defence is no offence. We are pleading not guilty and we are going to fight this. And it is a fantastic example of both a combination of the community campaign and committed lawyers and the supporters coming together and fighting and fighting and fighting and leading to a situation in which a predominantly white jury threw that case out in no time at all. A tribute to that method of organising. So it's one of the, I think, the proud examples that we have to take into the struggles that we continue to face today and in the future. I'm not really going to say much more than that, because there are other people who can say more about the specifics of the case, and I hope they do. But I think if there's one lesson that I think we should learn, it's something that we talked about yesterday, people who came to the meeting on undercover policing. The state, time and time again, tells us that we're not allowed to organise, that ordinary people, the only opportunity that we have to express ourselves is once every few years at an election and so on. These examples say no, that the fundamental changes in society, the recognition of the existence of institutional racism in our society came about because the Lawrence family fought and fought and fought and forced a really pretty, Michael can confirm this, a pretty right-wing judge who had a bad reputation on the question of immigration. They forced him to draw a conclusion about the existence of institutional racism in his own words because of the weight of opinion that was expressed at that public inquiry. The weight of opinion being the people from the community who time and time and time again, when the police, the local council, the housing authorities and so on said, we're not racist because we've got this policy document which they blew the cobwebs off and showed to the judge saying this shows that we're anti-racist, the people, ordinary people said no. It's that spirit, it's that sense of community organisation that we will have to take into the Grenfell inquiry. It's that sense of organisation that we need to keep together to ensure that we drive back the fascists who are beginning to try and organise, the people responsible for these attacks. It will be that will drive back the racists who are trying to organise around the Football Lads Alliance and so on. So I will finish on that, the important lesson of organising our communities and working together to struggle for a better society.
The victory for the Rotherham 12 was a victory for the whole of the working class, for black and white unity. There's absolutely no doubt about that. And the victory came in the face of not 14, Brian, 20 Nazi marches in about 2.5 years, 20. We had every fascist from Britain, and we also had the Ku Klux Klan from America. Can you imagine the fear and the climate of racism being ripped up in the town? But we turned the tide, we turned that round, and it was due to the solidarity and unity from across trade unions up and down the country. But and Michael Mansfield was absolutely fantastic in the trial by destroying the police case, exposing the lies, and as Brian said, a predominantly white working class jury kicked out the charges, but also convicted 4 Nazis and saw them jailed for causing the violent disorder in the first place. And I think it's worth expanding on how this come about, because we did have the CSE scandal, and at the time when Nazis were coming to Rotherham, it was very hard to say we have to turn out and oppose them. But socialists like myself did argue that, and through UEF we did every single time oppose the Nazis. And that meant that over a period it gave people confidence. And we had a terrible murder, a racist murder of Mushin Ahmed, 80-year-old, kicked to death, stamped to death in the street on his way to the mosque by 2 racists. And a fortnight later, we had another demonstration when Britain first came. And that was the first time, really, that the Asian community turned out, because they were angry, and also because we'd stood there all those other times. They felt they had to come and show solidarity with us. And that was how it came about, that they made that stand, which was so important, because they were right to protest. They were right to make a stand. They were right to launch a political campaign, which was absolutely crucial. And I think that is one of the lessons. We have to get organised. We have to see how a new leadership, and this has happened in Rotherham, a new, particularly young Asian leadership has developed over the last few years, which is now taking on the racism which is being whipped up at the moment. There is an increase in racist attacks, but actually we saw UKIP's would-be leader, Anne-Marie Waters, who launched Pegida, she's really a fascist, she had to scuttle out of Rotherham because they cancelled the meeting at the New York football stadium because we had a group called Millers, that's the group of fans, Brom United fans, against racism and Islamophobia. So, you know, that fight is still going on. And I believe at the moment we see that... Phil. I'm going to finish. Thanks. The heightened political atmosphere because of Jeremy Corbyn giving people hope. We have to see how this is going to re-energise the campaigns against racism, how we have to take the Grenfell Towers campaign, justice for Grenfell, and we have to get justice for Edson da Costa. We have to make sure that we start to fight for a better world. When we fight, we can win.
I'm sure most people have heard of the Iqbal's infamous speech of Rivers of Blood, but not many people remember that immediately after that, a wave of race attacks had spread around all through the whole country, which at the time the mass media disgustingly termed as Pecky bashing. And at the time I was living in Gravesend, and I was young at the time, and so we got some of the youth together and we formed the very first Asian youth organization at that time in 1969 called Indian Youth Federation of Gravesend. And we took on the fascists. And in fact, a few years ago, the Channel 4 made a documentary about it. And if you Google 6th Street of Gravesend, Sikh as the religion, S-I-K, 6th Street, you will see how the National Front started coming to the town. And over 5 or 6 weeks, we beat them up and we pushed them out of town. The police arrested 40 of our people. Luckily, no one went to prison, but quite a few of them had to pay heavy fines. And after that, in 1974, the National Front held their very first rally in the Red Lion Square. Outside, there were massive protests, thousands of people protested, nearly most of them white, left. And the police attacked them brutally. And a young student from Warwick University called Kevin Gately was killed by the police. After that, the National Front held their very first march in Leicester in 1974. And that's when I came into contact with what was known then IS, before the SLP, because I took a coach load of our youth from Gravesend all the way to Leicester. Unfortunately, on that day in Leicester, we were the only Asian there. The local Asian people, they had, with the local IW, they had decided to march somewhere else, many, many miles away, and they did not want to confront the National Front. So after that, there were many, many National Front marches on which we started going. But it was mostly, almost always, the white left who were fighting on the streets. And although the people were coming out in this, like we did in Gravesend, but going out of your own town, fighting the fascists in the streets, it was mostly, almost always white, mainly the IS members. That's why I joined the IS at the time. In fact, Tariq also joined the IS as well. I met him in 1974. But I drew a different conclusion. I realized that it's the black and white united, that's the only way we can defeat the fascists. And soon, after Lewisham, the Anti-Nazi League was launched. And in fact, there's a meeting tomorrow morning by Lewisham. And Anti-Nazi League, which drew thousands and thousands of people, and became one of the biggest movements in this country at the time. And that's how we beat the National Front. Soon after, in Southall, when the National Front came, I was the chief steward there. Our comrade and friend, Blair Peach, was killed by the police fighting against fascists. So unite and fight, smash the National Front, black and white, unite and fight was the slogan that beat the National Front. Thank you.
Right, after B, I've got Matt Foot.
My name's BK, I'm a GMB shop steward in Sheffield Council. When the Rotherham 12 case started to happen, I raised it in a worksite meeting in my workplace. And it was actually quite a hard argument, but we managed because we'd sent people on the anti-fascist demonstrations, because we'd conducted an argument around the CSE scandal and the exploitation and defended the Muslim community in terms of the terrible racism that was around. We had a groundswell of support that was starting to happen inside of our workplace, and so we managed to get agreement for that. When we took it to the GMB meeting, it actually took us months to get the GMB branch to agree to have a debate about supporting the Rotherham 12, and it was really interesting. And actually, a lot of the opposition came from Labour Party members who were arguing things like, we don't bring politics into the union branch, that we don't, it's a legal matter, so we can't discuss it. This is despite the fact that previously we'd had speakers from Hillsborough and from Orgreave, if we're going to talk about legal matters and talk about self-defence is no offence, two classic sort of, campaigns in that sense. And I think, if we're honest about it, there was a layer of some of our members who were either frightened, there was some racism around, certainly Islamophobic sort of ideas around. So we got Abrar Javid along to talk to them directly about it. And it made a huge difference because Abrar described the context of living in Rotherham at that time, the CSE scandal, the murder of Moshin Ahmed, and basically said to people, if you're walking down the street and you've got fascists throwing bottles and sticks at your kids, what would you do? And, those kind of arguments turn people because they realise that this is about real people and these are real arguments and they're very, very important. So we managed to get support, and when the case was happening in court, the GMB branch wouldn't let us take the GMB banner to the protest outside of court because they were really frightened about the fact that they'd be seen to be supporting the campaign. When the campaign won, when the court case won, we insisted on bringing Abrar Javid back. I'll be honest, I was rubbing the noses in it a lot. I was very proud of what we'd done, and I also thought it was important that the people who voted against it actually saw what had happened. And Abrar was really funny because he said, I know there was a bit of a problem getting this argument through, wasn't there, a few months ago when I last came? And they were all like, no, it was fine actually. But what was really important was that he stood there and he wasn't, bitter about it. He was really, really hard with them about it in terms of the fact that the support was really important. And the thing that I loved was he also told the story, and I'm hoping that this is true. He said that when the jury vetting took place by the fascist lawyers, the kind of organisations that they asked people if they were members of included the GMB. We thought that was a proud moment for our branch because we wanted to be counted as a group on the left that was a force to be reckoned with. The racists looked a little bit nervous at that point, but actually the important thing was that we fought and argued for anti-racist ideas. We built on the things that we'd done before. We talked about the need to support, and we talked about an injury to one is an injury to all. It's a really important lesson for the trade union movement.
I've got Matt, followed by Yuri Prasad.
Yeah, I'll never forget the end of the trial when the clerk read out the 10 names of the people who were on trial, and proudly the foreman said very proudly and loudly, not guilty 10 times. It was a wonderful moment. And the other most memorable moment was really the end of the prosecution case, where this prosecutor had spent the whole case talking about a Mexican standoff between the community and these fascists, as if they were both equal in some sort of, Western. And he loved this phrase, the Mexican standoff. And he finished his speech and he said, I've got to go off now and prepare for another trial, and excused himself and started walking off to the door. And Mr. Mansfield gets up and says, well, I don't know what we think about that, but maybe we should give him a Mexican wave. And the whole of the jury laughed. And for one moment, you thought they were actually going to do it as well. That was the feeling. And it was the most wonderful dismissal of a prosecution case I've ever seen. I want to come back to the beginning, because the beginning of these cases is incredibly frightening, actually. It's the opposite of that. That people are arrested in dawn raids, isolated, individually. Police come in large numbers, smash down their doors, and suddenly they're in a police interview if they've got a lawyer, a strange lawyer they've never heard of, and they're confronted with compilations made by the police over weeks of them activity completely out of context. And the pressure is enormous to plead guilty. Mike talked about earlier what it's like at the beginning. It's enormous. And the lawyers come along and a lot of them say, oh, well, it's all there. The evidence is straightforward. You need to plead guilty. And into that, in this case, as I'm sure happened before in the Bradford 12, people come along and try and protect and bring people together. And it's not an easy process. I remember at the first meeting organised by the monitoring group and United Against Fascism, there was a very good turnout of the community. But on the way back to the station, I asked Salim, the second defendant, how many people were there who were actually defendants. Only 6 were represented. And I said, you've got to work on them. The older defendants worked on the younger defendants. And I learned a story. It was a wonderful story from Asif, my client, that he remembered from school taking cans of food in for the miners, and he knew that if the miners lost, it would be him next. It was something I never knew about that sort of tradition of Labour Muslim families. And that's what they drew upon to convince the others to get to a critical mass, even to plead not guilty, and then they were all wonderfully acquitted. I just say one other point, which has sort of been getting on my nerves recently, amongst this wonderful resurgence of the left and the collapse of Blairism and all, the attack on Blairism and neoliberalism, is this phrase has come out in the last few weeks of we've got to support our police. And it intensely annoys me. I've seen it on Twitter and, a Labour slogan. It is the police, from their inception, from when they were invented, have always been about smashing protest, about keeping people in their place. When they went up to smash the Chartists in the Bullring and kick them out of the Bullring, the Metropolitan Police, that's what they're about. It's what they did in the miners' strike. It's what they're doing here, trying to fit people up for their own failures. Orgreave, Hillsborough, we can go through the list. They're never our police. But what this result showed, and Salim, it gave him back humanity from an all-white jury, pretty much all white, acquitted, that we can set them back.
Thank you. After Yuri, I'm going to have to cut the time down to 2 minutes. I'm a really horrible chair, but it's only because I want to fit in a few more speakers. So after Yuri, I've got Naima Omar.
Well, first of all, thank Tariq for coming, because for those of us who grew up in a Britain which told us nothing about Asian history, growing up, we were led to believe the stereotypes that we were these meek, mild people who you could do anything to, and, we just stood back when you attacked our shops and, brutalised us in the street and so on. And reading books like Tariq's novel, While There Is Light, gave you a glimpse of another Asian society that they even told you about at school or on the telly, one in which was courageous in its fight back and absolutely prepared to do battle with the racists. So thanks, Tariq, for coming. And whatever differences we have a lot more in common together, I think, than we will ever have that divide us. I want to say something important, the difference between what happened in the early 1980s in the case of the Bradford 12 and what happened 20 years later when the fascists came to Bradford in the early 2000s and provoked in a very similar way a riot in the 2000s. But there was something very crucially different. In the 1970s and 1980s, a radical youth movement existed alongside a radical left that was able to make the argument that self-defence is no offence and that we should not plead guilty to these charges. In the early 2000s, that movement was very much diminished. What was the response? It meant that parents took their children to the police station after the riot and handed them over to the cops and said, we trust you to do justice. What was the justice? 200 cases, 600 years worth of imprisonment. 600 years, 4 years for throwing a stone at the Nazis that had terrorised your community. 5 years for throwing a pole. 10 years for preparing petrol bombs. That was the price. So when people say, we need a bigger left, we need a stronger SWP, it's not rhetoric. Without a radical left inside this country to argue in every such occasion the need to resist, then the prospects of resistance are diminished and people pay the price. And they can pay the price in long years, in prison, and in many years of defeat. Can't allow that to happen.
Thank you. Just to remind you, Naima, you've only got 2 minutes and then it's Anthony Hamilton.
I think it's quite interesting how the state uses violence and, like, if the police kill a black man, it's automatically, they class it as self-defense. and say self-defense is fine, but if we use violence to protect us, it's a complete different story. And I think I wanted to touch on the point about Islamophobia, of course, considering how racism and austerity goes hand in hand. It will affect our white comrades indirectly, no matter what, in terms of justifying the cuts that the Tories will make. And I think, like you mentioned, how Islamophobia is becoming incredibly sexist and how it's targeting Muslim women on the streets and who don't feel safe. I think mostly I never used to feel safe on the tube, but now I don't feel safe on the streets. But when I'm with comrades and like Black and White United, I feel like you feel powerless by yourself, but together you feel powerful, and you have that sense of unity in the community, and we can fight back against them. And I think being a part of the party and being like on the left has really changed my narrative and where I stand, and I think it will change a lot of other Muslim girls. And like I won't mind going into like quite Nazi communities and giving them one for their money, but I think it's like giving people confidence to do it. And I think a lot of Muslim women, like we're not, I think me and Naila can tell you we're not submissive at all, but yeah.
After Anthony, Wayman Bennett.
I was going to talk about something else, but I'll leave it for the end. I want to first say something on anti-fascism as well, because the emergence of this Football Lads Alliance is obviously quite worrying, but I think that just means that we can't be complacent. We can't just sort of step back, do the regular stuff and expect them to go away, when the football season starts again. It's more that we actually have to then get to football stadiums now. We have to be leafleting outside places. We have to start organising and marching where they're trying to recruit, because not all football fans are racist. I'm from Teesside, right? And in Teesside, the fascists have always done incredibly well. It's an area which was absolutely decimated by the Tories in the 80s. There's nothing really left there, to be honest. And fascists have always done incredibly well there, exploiting racial tensions. But a few years back, the National Front tried to organise at Middlesbrough Stadium, tried to organise football fans there. 1 week they turned up giving out leaflets trying to recruit to their organisation. The next week the football fans came out and marched against them under the banner of Borough Against Racism, kicked them out of the stadium and unfurled the banner in front of all the rest of the thousands of fans who were there, and it was incredible. But I think just on what Michael was saying at the start about, Rotherham 12 should have never been persecuted. Grenfell should have never happened. It should have never burnt down. But, the people who are in control, the ruling class, they have absolute contempt for us. They don't care about ordinary working class people. They'll drag our names and our lives through the dirt, and they won't care about the outcome. But they also underestimate us. They underestimate us at every single opportunity, whether it's the Bradford 12, the Rotherham 12, whether it's this Grenfell campaign, whether it's the election with Theresa May expecting to just win on a massive landslide. I was at the Grenfell protest at Kensington Town Hall where we stormed the town hall, and the police were absolutely terrified. The point is that we've got the state on the back foot right now. The Tories are in crisis, and this is our absolute opportunity to finally actually create some change and build some sort of mass movement where we can actually fight for justice.
I want to start off by saying that we have to understand who the police are and who the state are. Last week, 3 weeks ago, when the acid attacks happened, we said that we put a tweet out saying who's doing this and who's carrying it out. I got called by the authorities to say, have you got any evidence? Do you know who's doing it? That's their bloody job. That's not my job, right? My job is to actually defend people that are being attacked. And it tells you everything about what the state is. It's not neutral. And when people say, I want 10,000 more coppers on the street as a slogan, I get nervous. And then they say, let's arm them as well. I think there's something going wrong. Do you know what I mean? They don't remember what happened to the Douglases. They don't remember what happened on all those occasions. And what we're talking about, actually, when we talk about these campaigns, actually, I look across this room, Phil, names, I look across this room, and I tell you something, in most of those campaigns, I can put a name to somebody who helped to organise them. And at the heart of that was somebody was a socialist. It matters that Jeremy Corbyn has made socialism something which is normal now. Do you mean in that sense? Before you used to quietly say, didn't you, I'm a socialist. Do you mean quietly, why are you doing this? Well, I'm against oppression, but I'm also a socialist. You used to say that. You didn't say it openly. Jeremy Corbyn's allowed us to openly say that because part of it is to understand how racism is used. It is used to divide us, actually. It is used to weaken us. And the most important thing I learned in being part of this struggle is the way that actually there's a link between black and white workers because most people know that coppers tell lies. They know this. They know this from the poll tax. They know this from the miners' strike. They know that this is the people. And the real question is how you connect them. There is a problem on the left, by the way, is that I think a lot of people take racism seriously, but some people don't. I'm sick of the Guardian types telling me that we live in a post-racist society, that it's dealt with, or you can economically deal with it if through that. It's not good enough, because we know that the Lads Alliance is a warning that they're trying to reorganise. You know, by the way, they don't come... I agree with Tariq on one thing. We've made massive steps forward. Now, the racists used to say, I'm racist and I'm proud of it. Now they say, I'm not a racist, I just don't like Muslims and I don't like black people and I don't like this person, I don't like that person, right? I'm a radical. They changed the words, but they're the same set of people. We have to have a strategy of exposing them. And by the way, it works. We beat the BNP.
Sum up, please.
We beat the English Defence League. We've beaten all these people. There's nothing automatic about it. But I tell you what, that has got to be the heart of it. At the heart of it, it's got to be a mass movement, but it's also got to have socialists at the heart of it that understand that they're also challenging those oppressions, but they're trying to do something else. They're trying to do what Tariq talked about, actually. I don't want my kids or other kids or the grandkids to have to deal with that for the rest of their lives. We want a different type of society. I want the oppression gone, but we have to have a different type of society.
I'm going to call Naila Ashraf, and Naila will be the last contribution before I call the panel back to respond.
Okay, I want to start by saying, I'm just iterating what other people have said is, you know, Tariq, you just, in your talk, you sort of said something about, you know, the police protecting us. I think the one thing that we've learned is the police are never going to protect us. It's quite clear they have their own agenda. And people have learnt that from understanding our own history and the struggles that we've come from. See, we learnt a lot. I mean, one of the best meetings, I'm from Stand Up for Racism in Manchester, and we were really proud to get Abra and the guys to come over and talk about their campaign. And one of the best meetings that were held in Manchester was when we had a meeting of the Mark Duggan campaign, Hillsborough, and another local campaign in Manchester around Islamophobia and terrorism cases. It was a Muslim man had been jailed for a terrorist case. And all four of them were on the... three other campaigns were on the platform, the four of them. And the thing everybody said is, oh my God, we've all got something in common. It's the police against us. It was class. You see, with the kids in that room from Moss Side, and the kids there, and they were like, well, we're black, and why are the Somalis in here? Because they're not really black enough, they're Muslim. And it was an amazing meeting, because it was in Moss Side, and it was one of the biggest meetings we'd had in Moss Side, probably the only meeting we'd had in Moss Side for years. But the lesson we learnt from that meeting is, it was class. We stood together because they were against us. Whether it was Hillsborough, whether it was Orgreaves, whether it was, you know, the Mark Duggan campaign, whether it was the Muslim community getting attacked under terrorism legislation, we were in this, they were against us, and we stood together in unity. So that's what it was about. And I think that's the thing that we've understood, more so than ever in Grenfell. You see, whether you're black or whether you're a Syrian refugee, we were in that together, and we stand together, we organise together, and it's against those at the start, whether it's the council, the Tory government, or the rich friends that they want to gentrify the area for, right? It's those working class people standing together, getting organised, and that's the unity we need to build on. And I think, you know, that's why we always argue, black and white unite. I love the demonstrations, we stand there and we chant that, because you see the Nazis and they hate it. And I shout that at the top of my voice because I'm really proud, because that's what we're about. Black and white unite and fight, and we can win. Thank you.
Listening to it, all the words that you all have to say, it's amazing, the sense of empowerment that you clearly feel, you know, that you have, which is fantastic. People actually defending their own rights, their rights to be heard, their rights to be listened to. And just look what you're creating. It's absolutely fantastic. Just wonderful to hear you all. And I know that Michael's really keen about empowering people. You know, he really pushes people to say, like, no, if you act, you can change things. You know, don't just sit there and stand back. Do something. So rather than respond to anything else that's gone on here tonight, I just thought, for someone that's encouraged so many people to empower themselves, to arm themselves, to believe in themselves, and to take action against the hierarchy and win. Michael is celebrating a very special anniversary this year. In November, he'll have been practicing at the bar for 50 years. And I know I'm biased, but anyway. But I just think we really should just give him a round of applause for the amazing work he's done for so many people, not just empowering them, but disempowering those that were, fabricating evidence, fabricating stories. So well done, Michael.
That's very, very, very kind. I do appreciate it because actually, as I'm getting older, it's happening far more often that people just come up in the street. They don't quite remember who I am, but they say, yes, that's right. And they touch me and say, great, just go for it. And that's it, and they walk off. And that's it. That's it. That's all I need. That's all any of us need, is to know there's solidarity on the street. That's the first thing. Second thing, I'll be quick, because I know you've got other things to do. But what I've been reminded of tonight is another movement that actually needs to be brought back from the shadows in which it's, I'm afraid, languished for a little time now. And I don't think, perhaps somebody can answer the question, is Suresh Grover, is he at this or not? No, I don't think he is. Some of you may know him, some of you may not. He's a focal figure in the Southall Monitoring Group, and I've known him for years. And we started together something in the 1990s called the National Civil Rights Movement, based on what Martin Luther King had been doing, but obviously we couldn't reach the same heights. But it did reach a very effective platform, and of course it's very difficult to maintain it. He's been seriously ill recently, and I can't do it on my own, and we got other lawyers involved. But what I just want to say, this National Civil Rights Movement, it actually traversed a lot of boundaries. And a lot of people came together who would not normally sit in the same room, and possibly not sing off the same hymn sheet. Just to show you how it worked, it started, in a sense, with the Lawrence family realizing how alone they had been and fighting their campaign, although it grew and it grew. So they wanted to pass on, and we thought, yeah, people need to know, not from me and not from you, but from other people on the street who've been through it and been oppressed. So they went and they spoke to the Bloody Sunday families about how to resist after years. The Bloody Sunday families then went and spoke to the Hillsborough families. And the feeling of solidarity, other things were happening, but this stream of people who've been through it, it's like SOS, people who've been through it actually have the strongest message with feeling to give to other people. And then, of course, what happens? The Hillsborough families are going down to Grenfell Towers. And so, although Suresh isn't here, I do feel at this particular moment we need to rejuvenate that and bring it back. And I think we'd all be interested in anyone here who's willing to contribute to that alongside everything else that's going on. Because it is about, at the end of the day, all our civil rights. Thanks.
Thank you so much. I take your point. There's an awful lot that unites us, even though there are things that divide us. And if nothing divides us, we just mirrors, and it's not going to work. It's in our divisions we find our unity. I didn't mention what happened in Bradford. Skinheads were coming to town. The police said, stay indoors. We said, get out of your houses. The community leader said, leave it to the police. We said, no, we will defend ourselves. When we found out that Southall had been bombed by petrol bombs, we knew that the fascists and the racists were organized. We said, we will organize ourselves and arm ourselves and defend ourselves, irrespective of what the law said, because it was our right to do so. In the courtroom, if I remember rightly, Michael, we were told by the prosecutors, if you acquit these men, what sort of Britain will you live in? And I remember very clearly saying, if you acquit us, we are confronted with the same situation again, we will do it again. The reason for that was because we knew thousands of people were demonstrating outside, and if we were going to go to jail, then at least we will go to jail with our heads held high, because we would have won in that sense. You're very kind. I would like to just take our minds a little bit further. Black people in this country brought politics to the struggle of trade unions and working class communities, as indeed today the struggle against imperialism, and Britain is an imperial power. It is rampaging, it is rampant, it is killing by the millions. You cannot live in peace and you destroy me in pieces, be it in Libya, be it in Afghanistan, be it in today in Syria. You can't do it. That's racism as well. You're bombing us. You're arming those who are bombing us. Now, a couple of things on radicalization, and I will end on an anecdote from my son, which I'm sure you will appreciate is quite a character. And I spoke recently at a meeting in Bradford on radicalization. You know, I'm sick to death. I don't know who raised this point. I'm sick to death of it. Radicalization is being done by the Sun, by the Mail, by the Mirror, by Trump, by Bush, by Blair. They are your radicals who destroyed. They are the radicals who destroyed country after country. For God's sake, what do you expect when you open the gates of hell? Mother Teresa's to come through? Even if with her weaknesses, even Mother Teresa's to come through, you're not going to get them. But there's something far more terrifying that is taking place. I had to tell my children in my house, before you open your door, check through the window. Because nowadays they're saying parcel delivery and here's your acid. Now, then it began to make me feel frightened and paranoid. And you can't live like this. This is no life of dignity. Therefore, what do we do? Why is this thing going on? When its poison spreads to this level, the next stage is lynching, the next stage is the putschs, and there's a word I forget, it might come to me, where there's a whole scale attack that takes place. Western civilization, pogroms. Western civilization isn't like us Asians, you know, we can slaughter each other and say, oops, sorry. We made a bit of a mess here. We don't build gas chambers. The gas chambers will be built here. And things are going in that direction. Now, how bad is it? Let me end with a little anecdote about my son. Again, he came in once from school, and he says, Dad, you came from town. You won't believe what happened. I said, what happened? And he said, well, we were on the bus going into town, me and this other Pakistani fella. The Pakistani fella was dressed in salwar kameez, the Pakistani clothes, and we're year 10, and he's quite big, and my son is big. And these little year 8s kept saying, come on, you Pakis, get out of our country, do this, do that. I mean, just quite taunting racism. And he said, these peanut heads, we could have slapped a lot of them, and we were stronger. But they kept going on and on and on. They wanted to fight. So they phoned their friends, and by the time my son got off the bus in town with his friend, there were loads of white kids, as old as them and older. And they put a circle around them in the city centre. And my son's friend said, oh, to hell with it. He started rolling his sleeves, and he said, La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah. In Arabic, all it means is there's no God but God, and Muhammad is his prophet. And these white kids heard the Arabic and they ran. I mean, it has got to these stages that, let alone the colour of skin, the sound of language is now become the harbinger of terrorism. That's a society that needs a broad-based anti-racist movement, one that draws from the past but has to fight on today. So my point of saying what the nature of the attack depends upon the nature of defense. Obviously, if somebody is throwing acid in our faces, you can't throw acid in faces. It'll end up being in our own faces. Political defense is needed, and if necessary, the organized attackers have to be taken on in their game and destroyed in their cells. We can't do that on our own anymore. The scale is so big. So therefore, shut up. Thank you.
And finally, Brian Richardson.
Comrades, I don't know if any of you have seen the series The Met Policing London. If you haven't, don't, because you will end up thinking that we should have the 10,000 extra police, because you see them solving murders, taking drugs off the street, being incredibly sympathetic. There is another story that needs to be told, the kind of story that you've heard on the platform this evening, the story of the deaths of Joy Gardner, of Cynthia Jarrett, of Cherry Groves, of the injustices experienced by the Lawrence family, by the Bradford 12 and the Rotherham 12. Those are the stories that we need to tell, but also tell them in the context of the proud history of united struggle that has led to, that has beaten those things back. Tariq is absolutely right to say that, you know, black organisations, the Bristol bus boycott took black workers, the struggles to expose educational injustices required black communities. But, you know, having raised those injustices, they fought for and won the support and solidarity of white working class communities, trade unionists and so on. And it is through that we have built some of the inspirational movements that people have talked about, the Anti-Nazi League and so on, the other movements which have successfully beaten back fascist organisations in the 70s, in the 90s, and again in the 2000s. But the fact of the things like these horrific acid attack, the fact that the Football Lads Alliance can mobilise hundreds, possibly thousands of racists and indeed fascists is an indication that we cannot afford to be complacent. In an era of austerity when people's lives are being made miserable, all sorts of ideas can get a hearing, including the ideas of the rotten racist right and fascist. So we need to take them on, we need to defeat them. But I want to finish on this. I think the indication of the last month or so is that, in a general sense, politics in this country has moved to the left. We were told in the aftermath of the referendum, weren't we, that what we were witnessing was an irretrievable move to the right, the resurgence of racist ideas and so on. Well, in fact, I think the general election, the way in which the surge in support of Jeremy Corbyn has put the question of class back on the agenda, the fact that Stormzy, you know, the great grime artist, can take the stage at Glastonbury and serenade tens of thousands of people around the slogan of "Oh, Jeremy Corbyn," is an indication that things have moved to the left. And that is something that we need to capture, we need to take advantage of, and we need to build into each and every struggle that we face, whether it's around Grenfell, whether it's housing campaigns, whether it's a fight for decent pay, but trying to go beyond that and using it to build a struggle to get rid of a completely rotten, irretrievably oppressive and exploitative system and replace it with something that we have seen in microcosm in Grenfell, in that area, in the aftermath of that devastation, the way in which communities can come together, support each other, build solidarity, and creatively build support for each other. It's that in microcosm is the kind of society that we can fight for and that we can achieve.